Hey guys, what's up? So, since we've had the support for Marek's archetype for the Winged Dragon of Ra, now we have further support for the Jinzo cards, which will also be in the same pack. These are also support for an old archetype used by Esperoba, who battled against Joey Wheeler, who he lost to, and he had to hand over his Jinzo. Which ended up being one of Joey's key cards within the Battle City tournament. There was one victory though. Esper was seen to beat Rex Raptor, who had summoned his Serpent Night Dragon. So here we go. The first card is the Menacing Jinzo. This is a level 7 Dark Machine effect monster with 2,400 attack and 1,500 defense. You can use each effect among the first and second effects with this card's name only once per turn. 1. If either player possesses a trap or traps on the field or in the graveyard, you can special summon this card from your hand, but its level becomes 6 for the rest of this turn. 2. During either player's main phase as a quick effect, you can tribute this card, special summon one Jinzo from your hand or graveyard. Then you can look at all spells and traps your opponent controls and destroy all traps among them. Now, my opinion on this is, well, it has the same attack and defense stat as the original Jinzo. It's just one level higher than its normal counterpart. The summoning requirement of this card is actually quite decent. I'd say if it had relied on your opponent having just traps on the field or in their graveyard, this might have been a lot more difficult to summon, considering most people don't run that many traps. There are things like evenly matched and impermanents that are run, but other than that, unless it's archetypes such as Trap Tricks or some very specific cards which are support within certain archetypes, people generally run spells or monster effects over traps, because with a trap card you have to set it before you can activate. Therefore they see, with the current game state, it being a lot slower. The whole idea of it becoming a level 6 for the rest of the turn might not actually be a problem, because there's no summoning restrictions after that. It doesn't say for the rest of this turn you can only summon Jinzo based monsters, which means it can be used if you've already got a Jinzo on the field for some rank 6 plays. So you can go into some quite decent Xyz monsters. The second effect is of replacing this with the Jinzo is actually also quite decent. Obviously your aim is to summon the original Jinzo, which will negate traps anyway. And you get to look at all the spells and traps your opponent controls. That's important. For the most part, you probably won't be destroying any traps unless they're running certain archetypes. But being able to look at your opponent's back row means you're able to see what the general plan is, or at least what they have ready set up. Just so you, any knowledge you have on your opponent's deck can only be a good thing. The second card is called Psychobounder. This is a level 4 light machine effect monster with 1,700 attack and 1,000 defense. And its effect is you can use each effect among the first and second effects with this card's name only once per turn. 1. If this card is normal or special summoned, you can add one Jinzo or one spell and trap card that specifically lists Jinzo in its text from your deck to your hand. 2. If another monster you control is attacked by an opponent's monster, before damage calculation, you can destroy both the attacking monster and this card. Now, this is a new form of Reflect Bounder. That card is designed more on effect damage, so if you kind of attack into it, you suffer, I think, the same attack as what your monster is. So really, if you're running that over, you're doing yourself at least 1,800 points of damage, even if you're looking at just the basic card to run this over. This is actually what the anime Bounder card was very similar to, because it had the whole almost reflecting an attack back at the opponent. It was used actually to destroy Jinzo, because Joey had used one of his gamble-based cards, which forced the two monsters to attack, and then Esperoba lost that way. And anyway, if your opponent is not going to read this effect, they'll probably do that anyway. So the destruction effect is quite useful. Anyway, because you would have summoned this already, you would have got its search effect off, so at least you've got something that's doing a couple of jobs, not just the basic one. And we've also got the Psycho Giga Cyber. This is similar to the Fiend Mega Cyber, which was had the exact same stats. This is a level 6 Dark Machine effect monster with 2,200 attack and 1,200 defense. I believe the Fiend Mega Cyber was a Fiend monster, so there's a slight difference, but I think it's more trying to tie everything together. You can special summon a card with this card's name using the way written in its first effect only once per turn. You can use the second effect with this card's name only once per turn. 1. If your opponent controls more cards that are spell or traps than you do, you can special summon this card from your hand. 2. When this card declares an attack on an opponent's effect monster while you control Jinzo, you can tribute this card, place that opponent's monster face up in your opponent's spell and trap zone as a continuous trap. Now, its summoning effect is not actually that useful these days. Your opponent isn't probably going to be setting spells or traps unless they absolutely need to. So summoning this card can be a little bit awkward. However, saying that, Fiend Mega Cyber has ironically got an easier summoning condition from the point of view that your opponent is more likely to have more monsters on the field. So actually, its summoning requirement is that your opponent has to have 2 more monsters than you do in order to normal summon it. The benefit of this is a special summon, so it doesn't waste your normal summon. The second effect is really decent and works very well with Jinzo. And when this so if your opponent has an effect monster, you can just basically get rid of your opponent's monster by putting it in their spell and trap zone. And unless they're one of those specific monsters, such as like some of the Vision heroes, which interact with your spell and trap zone, or Crystal Beasts, they won't have a purpose in your back row, in your opponent's back row. So it also works with some of the other Jinzo support as well, because I think Jinzo Lord allows you to destroy trap cards, and your opponent takes 300 points of burn damage. So it actually ties in quite nicely with that effect. The next card is Noir of the Cosmos. This is a normal spell. You can only activate 1 card with this card's name once per turn. 1. Your opponent can set 1 trap directly from their hand or deck. If they do, special summon 1 Jinzo from your deck. If they do not, add 1 Jinzo, 1 monster that specifically lists Jinzo in its text, from your deck to your hand. So this essentially is your rota for the deck. It's able to search out your Jinzo if your opponent refuses to search out a trap. And even if they do search the trap, you do get a Jinzo special summon to your field. Therefore, it makes your opponent's search useless. The one downside of that, though, is that it lets your opponent kind of select their own trap. So if they are running them, even if they're running just evenly matched or impermanents, and you do this and your opponent's able to get over your Jinzos, they'll start being able to use their traps again. And with a lot of monster and trap and spell effect destruction cards running around, they might be able to do that a lot easier than you think. So it is quite high risk, high reward. If you're already in a position where you're likely to win this turn, running this card isn't a problem, because at the very least you're getting more damage on board. Jinzo's a 2400 attack monster, it's decent, it's a level 6, and there are other plays you can be making, such as the rank 6 Exceeds monsters, and so you can always stack up the damage that way. And the last card is In Touch with the Cosmos. This is the artwork on this card is based on Esperoba's psychic premonitions. Basically, what he was doing in the Battle City tournament was he had a number of brothers, and they would actually just communicate with him above a building, where they would have like an earpiece and a microphone, and they would spy on their opponent's hand and say, "Okay, brother, this is what this duelist is running," and he was getting that information from there. That's kind of how he was cheating. This is a continuous spell. It is you can use each effect among the first and second effects with this card's name only once per turn. One you can send to the graveyard, one monster you control that is owned by your opponent. Special summon one machine monster from your hand or graveyard. 2, during your opponent's draw phase, when they conduct their normal draw, while you control Jinzo, you can declare a card type, monster, spell, or trap. Look at the drawn cards, and if the declared card type is among them, send this card to the graveyard, and if you do that, draw 1 card. So the first effect of this card is very much how how Esper used his mind control to steal over monsters, and being able to replace it with your Jinzo is decent, but it requires you to run cards which do that, such as mind control or brain control, which I would have preferred if this had been in the effect. It would have been a lot easier if there'd been, say, a third effect from there, where you could pay, say, 800 life points to take your opponent's monster, and have a restriction on it, such as you are unable to summon monsters other than Jinzo monsters for the rest of the turn. That would have been a fair restriction on it. The second effect is based on the whole premonition aspect, thinking of, like being telepathic and being able to foresee your opponent's cards as they draw. This is not that risky at the moment, considering most people are running either monsters or spells. Most people will actually call for monsters, and more likely than not, you'll actually get that right. Drawing a card is a bit of it's just a 1-for-1 effect. You get rid of this card, in exchange you draw a card. It's not going to help you since it's your opponent's draw phase, but you might draw into something necessary for your next turn. So it's actually quite decent. And we have, obviously, the reprints of Jinzo, Jinzo Returner, and of course Jinzo Jector. We don't actually have a Jinzo Lord that's actually going to be in this either, so that's quite interesting. So what do you guys think of the new cards? Personally, from me, I think it's actually they're quite good. They're providing a lot more support for Jinzo, even if it's just a few cards. It can be runnable, but it's not as such a complete deck. I think there are certain cards that are just needed before you can run this, or at least you're going to have to use this as part of something else in order to play it. Are there any cards that you really enjoyed out of the archetype? And are there any cards you don't like? Leave your comments down below, like the video if you enjoyed it, and don't forget to subscribe.